are going to miss all the songs. They're lost. No, you never know when they're going to get here. I texted them and said, come on time.
Well, hey, good morning. Welcome to Newbridge Church. We've got 4 seconds left. 3, 2, 1. Hey, so we're trying something new. We're going to start at 10 o'clock sharp every week. So if you want to be a part of the worship experience, 10 a.m. is when we begin. Welcome to Newbridge Church. My name's Tim Daniels. It seems as though we're coming out of the clouds of a week full of rain. I thought it was supposed to be April showers bring May flowers. But apparently May showers hopefully will bring June flowers. Would you stand with me this morning as we enter into worship?
I sing praises to your name, praises to your name, a name that's so much higher than all names, and all honor to your name. name up, oh God. We praise your name.
Sing with me. So let our praises fill this temple.
So let our praises fill the temple. Let our praises fill the temple. Let our praises fill this temple. For you are good. Let our praises fill the temple. Let our praises fill the temple. Let our praises fill this temple. For you are good. Sing that one more time. Let our praises fill the temple. Oh, let our praises fill the temple. Let our praises fill the temple. For you are good. Oh, be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Oh, be lifted up. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. And let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, and let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. And let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. And let the King of my heart be the wind inside
thing to grasp onto. Going through some sort of trouble, a family member has a sickness, a sudden sickness. You've gone through surgery. Your friends have left you. And for all of those things, we have Jesus. I was listening to a message recently and online, and a pastor friend of mine was just reminding us that for those things, those crossroads that we come to in our lives, for those things we have Jesus. And so I ask that you this morning would lift those to Jesus and trust that he is good and that his promises are good and that he is faithful and true. Amen? Amen. Would you be seated?
Well, good morning, everybody. That's two people.
Morning, Michael.
There we go. Don't you hate when like the pastor or the worship leader does that? It's like the enforced greeting that you have to like follow or you feel socially awkward. Thanks for humoring me. I appreciate that. Welcome to Newbridge. My name is Michael Howdy. I'm one of the pastors here. And I have some announcements for you. We have a lot of great stuff and a few tweaks and changes going on. We'll get into that here at Newbridge. But today, first of all, is our after church lunch. So if you want to have free lunch, you can come and join us. If you brought food, you can bring that because that's what that's for. That will not be in here. That will be over at the Commons. That's where Newbridge Kids is meeting. That's the building that you saw on the way in. And that will be right after. There's a brunch theme. Even if you didn't sign up, as of yet, we have not had one where we've run out of food and anyone went home hungry. So we'd love for you to stop by. Second thing is this, on the back table, and I talked a little about this more in detail last week, there's a display. It's for our friends at Young Lives. That is an organization that serves teenage moms, especially in the Plainfield area, now in the Newark area. And one of the things that we do a couple times a year is we basically get all our spare change, we put it in boxes, and we send it to them because it's sitting in your drawer, like in your hallway table or something anyway, or in that basket. We have a basket on the piano. It just accumulates all sorts of stuff that has nothing to do with anything. And so it's a great opportunity to fill those. Those are called change-elopes. There's instructions. You have to unfold them. But we would love for you to grab one of those. They're on the information table on the way out. Fill that up. That's due back in a couple weeks on Sunday, June 3rd. We don't usually kind of call out when people move. We don't do that necessarily publicly, but we felt like it would be important to kind of make an exception. And in a few weeks, our very own Sally Page, and you know Sally probably is one of the people who does coffee and who bakes amazing things. They will be moving away down to Virginia. Yes, and along with Frank and Dawn Post, who are they're the next generation down from Sally, and we're actually going to throw a going away party for her and for them June 2nd. It'll be at the Daniels house. If you know her, if you're interested in that, there are little cards on the information table. You can grab one of those. I have known Sally since I moved to New Jersey 18 years ago. We used to work together at the first church I served, and she has been one of the earliest parts of Newbridge. She came when it was in my house. She baked all sorts of stuff, like she outdid herself, and she's just served so faithfully in so many ways, and we just want to thank her for that. There's always more stuff going on. We'd love for you to check out your bulletin, your program, or the information table. If you're our guest today, we have a gift for you back here at our Welcome Center. We have a gift bag for you, and we also have a Connect card. So if you'd like to make your presence known to us and let us know any way we can serve you, you can do that, and you can head back to the Welcome Center after the service and get your free gift. And finally, if you're wondering, we don't pass an offering plate here, but we have a gift box in the back. You can give online at our website at newbridgenj.com, and we are very thankful for those of you who literally make this church happen. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something that's brand new. This is completely different. Some of you saw this on our social media. Maybe you got an email. We've been trying to figure out, we love worshiping in this space. We love being in this space, but it means that your kids are like a long way away. And for a few weeks, we've had the kids down there and us here. And that honestly just does not feel right. I don't like it. A lot of you, some of you want to get rid of your kids. You don't want to see them for a few hours. It's great for you. But one of the things that's important to us here at Newbridge is that families are able to worship together. That's really, in an age where everything is segmented and separated, we think one of the unique and beautiful things about this church is that we have all generations represented here. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to try another experiment. How many of you like experiments? Great. You're on board. So here's what we're going to do. This is something we heard from a pastor friend of ours. We're going to try this out. We're actually going to take a little break right now. And so here's what happened. You came in, and as some of you come in like 10 minutes after, guess what? We started on time today. So we're going to start on time. There's a countdown that goes to 10 o'clock, and if that thing hits 0, I don't care if no one's in here, they're going to start playing. That's how we're going to get some of this time back. But right now, we're going to take a little break. Those of you who have kids who check them in, you can take them down to Newbridge Kids. As usual, remember to go get them after the service, but grab a cup of coffee. This allows you to go to the bathroom without having to take the walk of shame. What an amazing concept. And the other thing we're going to do, and I thought this was cool, is I'm going to put a few questions on the screen. And if you don't know what to think about, if you don't know what to ask somebody, think about these questions. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. There's a timer that's going to go, and at the moment that timer's done, we're going to be done, and we're still going to end at exactly the same time. It's going to be the most amazing thing. So music's going to come back up. Say hi to somebody you don't know. Some of you are introverts and you totally hate this. So extroverts, leave the introverts alone. Let them have their peace. But let's try this out and we'll see how it works. And I'll be back with you in just a few minutes.
been here before? The other building. It's great to be in here. It's just it's disjointed. They want to be here for the music. The parents of the kids want like this thing to go. Yeah. How long have you been planning about it? Oh, it's like it's nice to have it. Local? Some people come from very far away. Bridgewater, I'm always amazed at how large a town it really is. It's got like little fingers that go around all these other. And then you're entering it again. Yeah. Which end of town are you guys? What's that? That's my way far south. It's almost like white. See, that to me is like a car in itself.
Oh, really?
Off Milltown Road. A bunch of people I know there. Oh gosh. There's homes. It's far into Milltown as you approach. There's one that goes to there. 28. We're like the second or third road from 28. You're heading that way on the right. I think. It's maybe women's. Like I know it starts with an M maybe. I know it when I see it. It's one of those things. Like I know exactly how to get it. There's a few families that live. Tanya lives right here too. Actually, I'll let you, if I see you next time, she's here. You guys might live right next here. I miss the old art, old European. Actually, I'm being videotaped this entire time.
No.
Is it videotaping my voice? No, it isn't.
Suddenly, everybody got very quiet, like all at once. You guys are such conformists. Someone was telling me that I'm like a nonconformist. I really am not. Thanks for trying this experiment with us. Those of you who got your kids down to Newbridge Kids, I don't know if you went to college. Did you ever have one of those classes where you had like one class was on this end of the campus and the other one was like way over here on this end of the campus? And you had like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever to just book like a mile. That's kind of what this was. But you guys did it in about 7 minutes. I was very, very impressed. It wasn't raining. But what we would love from you is just your feedback, just your experiences. I mean, just having everyone together feels great to me. But any way we can make this better, tweak this, we'll continue to do it. We're just continuing to try to find the best way to serve families, serve your family, serve the whole family, and be able to do that in the best way possible. Well, welcome back. We're glad you're here. I hope you got some coffee. Some of you met some people. Some of you pondered. You pondered the questions we had up. And today we're going to begin a brand new series here at Newbridge. And this is something I've been praying about for quite a bit of time as I've gone over kind of the past couple of years and watched how things have gone in our culture and in the church. And really, and I've said this before in some ways, I think we as Christians in America have a problem. We have a problem. There's something that's like a flashing yellow or red light on the dashboard of our faith. And it's something I feel like I've wanted to talk about, and as I prayed about it, this is kind of the moment that I think is our moment to begin to address this. And we'll be looking at this for the next few weeks, but this scratches the surface of a very, very big issue. And hopefully we're able to look at it in a different way than we've looked at it before as Christians and as the church, because it's not an unfamiliar issue, and it's not even a new issue, and it's an issue you know all the right answers to. So me getting up here and telling you what you're supposed to do is not going to help one bit. So I want to get under the surface of it a little bit more. You know what? The people of God, Christians, the Jesus followers, however you want to describe that, are supposed to be known as people of faith, people of hope, and people of love. They will know that we're Christians by our love. Guess what the statistics say? We are not known as that. That is not what we are known as. When you ask the average person on the street, what do you think of Christians? They do not answer, well, they're such loving people. They have so much hope. They're so filled with faith. I mean, we all know examples of that, but kind of the average experience that people have is not like that. And much more often, what we are known for is the things and the people that we're against. We're known for everything that we're against. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone come over to my house for dinner, or we've gone to a restaurant or something like this, and we're just getting to know each other, and they're totally stiff, and they finally, somewhere in the middle figure out that like I'm a kind of a normal, at least as normal as I can be, kind of person, that they don't have to put on airs, that they don't have to pretend to be something they're not. And that is just the experience that people have with Christians. They stiffen up around us. And there's some reasons for that, because over our history, and especially in the past 100 years, we have been known very much for all the things that we're against, the people, the groups that we're against, the movements that we're against, that you don't dance, you don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't go to movies, you don't do this, you don't do that, you dress a certain way, you act a certain way, and so on and so forth. On it goes. I have a friend on Facebook, and he's actually a theologian, and he posted this album cover yesterday, and I just thought it perfectly describes how the world around us sees us as Christians. This is a record, and the title of the record, this is a musical record, is Modernism is the Work of Satan. So rush out and get that. Rush out and get that record. This is an actual, someone decided, this is the thing we really need to take 10 songs and 2 sides and really do something about. This is exactly how the world around us sees us. Maybe the words are changed. You guys are trying to figure out what's going on in here. There's a couple extra words. There's 2 thes, and the word Isaiah is spelled wrong, in case you were wondering. But this is an actual thing. This is like an actual thing. I actually have a small collection of records just like this. You didn't know that, now you do. But I collect paraphernalia like that. But what's interesting is this would have come out sometime in the 50s when really the modernist movement and culture was really rising to the forefront. And so people in the church decided that was of the devil. Now we're entering the postmodern era, and you don't have to really care about that. You just have to know that Christians also think that's of the devil. And so if you go Google search this stuff, you just find website after website and so on and so forth. And so we're known very much for the things that we're against. And I think the reason for this is kind of simple and kind of profound. It's because when it comes to our faith, when it comes to the things, the hope that we hold dear, very often we as a people, and I'm not saying we specifically in this room necessarily, but we as a people have a fear that there's something that's going to get corrupted about our faith. There's something that's going to be taken from us. If the wrong influences get in, they're going to just mess the whole thing up. And so we've got to circle the wagons, we've got to bolt the doors, and we've got to be on guard for the things that are going to take down our faith. I have some good news for you this morning, folks. The Roman Empire couldn't stop the movement of Jesus Christ. No political movement has been able to do that. No oppression has been able to do that. People have been thrown in jail. They've been imprisoned. They've been killed. And the gospel of Jesus has spread like wildfire. So this is not something that we need to worry about. You know, when the world changes around us, change threatens us. But I think there's a more personal application to this as well. We look around the world, and if you're raising kids in this world like I am, you look around the world and you wonder what kind of world your kids are going to inherit, what kind of country, what kind of neighborhood, what kind of situation they're going to inherit. You know, you look around your life and there's medical diagnoses in your family. There's difficulty with finances, in marriages, in families, in relationships. There's addiction, there's struggle. And so there's a 4-letter word that describes all of this, and it's not the one that you think when you hear the word 4-letter word. And it's the thing that defines us. And more than any other thing, how we deal with it has the ability to make or break us and make and break our faith. And that 4-letter word, as you probably guessed, is fear. I think one of the great struggles of American Christianity is how we deal with the issue of fear. And I think the problem with this is we all know, you don't need me to tell you, that fear drives you in some pretty bad directions. And we know, we're not supposed to have fear, we're supposed to be fearless. And, there was probably some series you heard and some guy that there was like a football player involved, and it was just like, we're going to take over fear. And you've probably heard that in church. But the reality is we face it every day in so many different ways in our lives. But the challenge with it when it comes to our faith is when we embrace fear and we embrace a faith that is mixed with fear, it fundamentally changes the message of Jesus. It changes it into a different message. And so when the gospel, the message, the good news, the hope of Jesus Christ gets mixed with fear, fear from without, fear from within, fear within our lives, fear in our world, however you want to define it, it turns it into something else. When you add fear to Jesus, you end up with something that's very different than Jesus. And in the Bible, it says, fear not, do not be afraid, or some variation of that over 100 times. Often with it, it says, remember. Do not be afraid, because it's something that when we look around our lives, it is so easy and there are so many good reasons for us to be afraid. And this is one of those commandments. This isn't like in the 10 Commandments, but fear not is a command that I believe that we forget so often that Jesus gave us. And one of the ironies of this is the more fervent we are as Christians, sometimes the more fearful we become. But when you look at the world, when you look at life, when you read the news, when you see yet another school shooting this week, and that's on top of yet another school shooting, and we look around and we look at our schools, and I look at my son's school and I say, could this be the next one? Just like you do. Fear has the ability to creep in. And when somebody like me, some pastor standing on a platform says, do not be afraid, how does that help you? Does that help at all? You're like, oh, great, thanks for that. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm good to go. It doesn't help at all. When someone says, don't be afraid, it doesn't really help us. And this is something I want to get at that I think we miss a lot of times in the church, is that fear actually can be a good thing. It's a good thing. It keeps you out of trouble. When you got into your automobile this morning and you started the car and you put it into drive and you put your seatbelt on, there's enough fear, hopefully, that keeps you paying attention so that you stay on the road. And really the thing about fear is it's our ability to remember the past, and it's our ability to project into the future. There's something that happened or something that you knew that happened. Like when I went to driver's ed class when I was 16 years old, they showed like film strips of car accidents. It was really a great time. And they just showed all these different pile-ups, and it was all the serious things that could happen if you didn't take driving a car seriously. And the idea behind that was to create an image in us that we would project into our own futures, and so we would drive safely. If you had a bad Christmas, and then you had another bad Christmas, and you had a third bad Christmas, at some point you're going to start looking at Christmas and saying, Christmas is kind of bad, and I should avoid Christmas, or I should change it. I flew out of Newark Liberty International Airport a few weeks ago, and we flew out of Terminal B, and there's like one restaurant in Terminal B where I flew out, and it's an airport sushi restaurant. Here's a bad life decision, eating sushi at Newark Liberty International Airport. I do not suggest that. It would only take one time of things going bad. You'll never, ever touch it again. And so we have the experiences. Your son or your daughter touches the hot stove for the first time, and then they don't do that again because there's something that shapes how they see life, how they see the world, how they go forward. And it actually keeps us alive and keeps us safe. It keeps us going in a good direction. We avoid bad things and we stay close to good things. But I think the challenge with fear is not that it shouldn't exist, but so often it gets into the wrong places in our lives. Fear gets into the wrong places, the wrong circumstances, the wrong stories. I tell a lot of stories about my little boy because the clock is ticking until I can't do that anymore. He's about 3 years old, and he loves elevators. If you want to have a great conversation with him, talk about the elevators, and he'll talk about the down arrow and the up arrow and the number 2 and the letter B and how the doors open and close. Like when I've been traveling a lot recently, and when I've been gone, I have to FaceTime him whenever I get in the elevator and walk him through the experience. It's just, that's all he wants. He comes on the screen on FaceTime, he asks about the elevators. He doesn't care how I am. How are you, Daddy? Nope, none of that. Where is the elevator? Go to the elevator. And so that's my experience. But recently, about a month ago, we were in an elevator with him because he loves elevators. And the thing that beeps was like too loud, and he got totally traumatized by it. And so now every time, like late at night, he'll be falling asleep. He'll be like, it was just that one elevator, right? It was the beep. The beep was too loud. And so he's traumatized. He'll actually say traumatized by the elevators. And he had this one bad experience that he's projected into the wrong places in the rest of his life. And that's what we tend to do with fear. It's a good thing that very often gets into the wrong places in our lives. And that's why this thou shalt not kind of command of Jesus, do not be afraid, is so important. We're going to look at a story. It's another boat story. Last week we looked at a boat story in the Gospels, and this week we're going to do the same thing in the Gospel of Mark chapter 4. And what Jesus would do so often when he was trying to illustrate a point or make an object lesson for his disciples, he'd take them out and have this kind of visual aid. He'd take them out on the boat and show them something. And that's kind of what happens here in the story. So in Mark chapter 4, this is a Sunday school story if you grew up going to Sunday school. And the story goes like this. That day when evening came, he, and that's Jesus, said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side, leaving the crowd behind. And one of the reasons they do this is because the crowds follow Jesus everywhere. So the only way they could get away, they didn't have 6 Escalades and security guards. So the only way they could get away was to get on the boat and go over to the other side, and the crowd would follow them. And so they were always trying to manage the crowd. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall, a furious storm came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" This past week, we had some crazy thunderstorms. And I was up visiting a friend in Parsippany, and the sky was getting darker, and I was actually nervous about it. It got darker and darker. I got so nervous that I posted it on Instagram, because that's what the kids do these days when they get nervous, is they just put it on social media. 2 of you thought that was funny. But I did that, and it was just getting darker, and I was driving down Route 287, and branches were coming down, and trees were coming down, and I was literally afraid that I wasn't going to make it home, that a tree was going to crush my car, I was going to be stuck in traffic, and that unfortunately those kind of things did happen to some people. But I can only imagine how the disciples felt. There's no weather forecast. They're out in this not very big boat in the middle of a lake. It was the Sea of Galilee, but it was big enough, and the storm is coming up, and the waves are getting higher, and the sky is getting darker, and the wind is starting to blow, and the rain is starting to come down, and Jesus is in the back of the boat, and he's asleep. And some of you have a circumstance in your life. You have something that happened. You have something that's happening, and it feels like Jesus is in the back of the boat and he's asleep. And you do in your mind and in your heart exactly what the disciples do. Jesus, don't you care? Don't you see what's going on here? Don't you see what I'm going through? The circumstances are getting worse. The waves are getting higher. The sky is getting darker. It's getting kind of scary. And I have every reason to be afraid. Where are you? And that's what the disciples do. Jesus did what Jesus does. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet. Be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they're like, Jesus, did you happen to look outside? Did you happen to see what was going on while you were asleep on your cushion? Things got really pretty bad. Where were you? And I think the problem with the subject of fear, when pastors talk about it, when people like me stand in rooms like this with people like you, we talk about it. So we say, you have Jesus, you should have no fear, perfect love casts out fear, we're going to deal with that later. You should not be afraid, would never be afraid. And you're like, I'm sitting in a row in an air-conditioned room, I'm not afraid right now, but the moment I go outside the door, that circumstance hits me. That reality hits me at 3 in the morning. When I wake up, there's that pit in my stomach. There's that picture. There's that thing. There's that diagnosis. There's that financial reality. There's that career thing. There's that broken relationship. There's that thing that I cannot escape. And that's the moment where I really need you to come through, Jesus. And that's how we feel. Because the reality is this. There are some things in our lives that are very real, that we should be afraid of, that you wouldn't be human, you wouldn't have a heart if you didn't feel a sense of anxiety or fear. I think part of the challenge, though, when it comes to someone saying, don't be afraid, don't have any fear because, Jesus this and Jesus that, is really how fear works. And I've actually studied this quite a bit. The way that your fear response works is actually a subconscious or an unconscious urge. It's actually triggered by this little thing in the back of your brain called the amygdala. It's called the lower brain. I call it the squirrel brain because that works for me. I don't know if you've ever driven down the road and a squirrel starts to cross and then he flips out and he runs back and then he runs back again and he just is darting back and forth. It's because he doesn't know what to do in that moment because he's been triggered by that thing. And that's kind of how fear works, is we can tell ourselves we shouldn't be afraid. We can tell ourselves that it's all going to work out. We can tell ourselves all sorts of things, but it's this thing that's actually in our subconscious. That's why at night when you wake up, you're afraid sometimes because your brain actually hasn't kicked in yet. That's literally the physiological reason for that. I think another reason is this, is that we actually, especially men, we don't like to use the word fear because we're men. So we use other words. We use the words like stress or pressure. But really, they're the same thing, worry. And so fear is subtle in how it works itself into our lives. And here's the other thing, and this is why I think it's so important for us in the church, is fear is actually contagious. And people have studied this as well. There's studies that say you catch the fear or you catch the courage of the people around you. So if you hang out with a bunch of people who are, fearful about what's going on in the world, it doesn't matter how not fearful you'll be. Eventually, if you hang around those people long enough, that will be who you become. And so the reality for us is that fear is a part of our lives, and just me throwing some Bible verses at you and saying you shouldn't fear doesn't really help you very much, just like it honestly doesn't help me very much. But I think one of the things that we can take away from this is there is actually a way to fear less. Fear will never be absent from our lives, but there's a way that we can fear less, even when there are very real things that we ought to and can and should be afraid of. Let me show you how it works. The story goes on. The disciples, they say this. They say, they were terrified. Remember, the storm is gone. The seas are calm. The waves have been calmed down. Guess who's still terrified? The disciples. They're still afraid, but it's for a completely different reason. They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, honestly, if you were out on a boat and it was pretty crazy, and some guy got up and said a couple things, and the storm went away, I don't care how great your faith is, how great your spirituality is, your Christian walk is, you would be pretty freaked out by that. Because it's not normal. Because it's showing a power that most people, and certainly we don't have, this person actually has. What happens to us when we feel fear or stress or pressure or anxiety or worry or any of those other words that we use to disguise the same thing, is what we're looking at is we're looking at our lives, we're looking at the circumstance, we're looking at that thing that's in front of us, and we're saying, I'm not smart enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not strong enough, I don't have enough experience with this, I don't know how to handle this. That's really what it is. It's an expression of saying, I stand something to lose here, and I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to handle it. We're not enough for what we face. The circumstance is too much. But what happens here, and stick with me just for a second, is the disciples end up still afraid, but now instead of being afraid of something, they're a little afraid of someone. And the reason they're afraid of Jesus, and it's not just like, quaking in our boots, Jesus, but they're just like taken aback by it, is because Jesus shows that he is enough. That he is big enough, that he is powerful enough, that he is strong enough for the circumstance that they know that they're not. There's someone who's bigger, who's more than them, who's more than their understanding, more than their circumstances. Mark, the writer here, he does this really interesting thing when he uses the word terrified. He basically, in the original language, he underlines it and capitalizes it. They were completely flipped out. He uses the noun form and the verb form. They didn't know what to make of this. And here's what I want to do this morning. I want to suggest to you that being taken aback like that is actually the beginning of faith. Now, I'm supposed to say that. I'm a pastor. But being taken aback by Jesus and who he really is and what he really did is actually the beginning of faith. Because here is what is absolutely true, and this is whether you're a Christian person or not. When your faith in someone exceeds your fear of something, fear loses its grip. When your faith in someone exceeds your fear of something, fear loses its grip. My son can handle the elevator when I'm with him because I'm bigger than the circumstance that seems so big for him. You know that when you faced a new thing, or maybe you started a new job, or maybe you did this new thing that required you to really step out on a limb, when there's someone with you who's been there before and is not completely flipped out by that thing, it allows and it causes fear to lose its grip on you. If you've ever been skydiving, you know what they do is they don't just send you up and jump you out the back of the plane by yourself. There's someone who goes with you. There's a reason for that because that person knows what to do and they've been there before. And this is true in so many different ways in our life, but it's also true with Jesus. Because here's really what fear is when you get to the bottom of it. Fear is facing something that looks a lot like death. Fear, whether it's a big fear for your life, whether it's a small fear, it's something that's a lot like facing down death. You're looking at this thing that represents death. And what death really is it's the end. The reason we're so afraid of death, so many of us, is because it's so unknown. It's like it's the only point we know up to, and after that point, we don't really know. Those of us who are Christians, we believe, if you have faith in Jesus Christ, that's not the end of the story. But that's the only thing anyone has ever told us about is up to that point, and then it's the end. But all of our fears are about facing the end of something. The end of a family member, a friend's life. The end of hope. The end of a relationship. The end of self-sufficiency. The end of who you thought you were. The end of your understanding or your ability to control or your ability to grasp. Those all represent an end, and when you get to the end of those, it's actually kind of like a death. And that's really what fear is. This fear is about death. And those endings are why it's so hard for us to go through fear, because they're the ultimate unknown. Remember what I said. Fear is when you look back in the past, but then you project it forward into the future. And your imagination runs wild. And when you think about the end of something, your imagination runs into some deep and difficult and dark places. What if you could face all of those endings with someone who has been there and done that? What if you could face all of the endings? The literal, the figurative, the big, the small, things that represent death in your life with somebody who has been there and done that. It would change how you saw it. It would change how you experienced it. It would change how you feel. Someone who's bigger, someone who's more, someone who's greater than. And the good news is that's who Jesus is. What if all the endings in your life weren't actually the end? You know what I think is so interesting about the story? We kind of fast forward through the whole story of Jesus and his followers. Is Jesus tells these guys, fear not. He gets up, he does the thing, the waves settle down. They're a little more afraid of him than they are of anything else. And the cycle repeats and it repeats and it repeats because, you'd think to yourself, hey, Jesus he totally owned that storm and there's no more storm and so I have nothing to be afraid of. But we discover again and again and again and again, they face the same things and the fears come up because it's part of the human condition. And that's why Jesus needs to say, fear not, remember, don't be afraid. He says it over and over again. They're in another storm and they're afraid. Jesus gets arrested and they're afraid. Jesus is crucified and they all abandon him and they deny him and they betray him and they all run away. And fear is very much part of that story. But then there's something that happens. And it's what we believe the hope of our lives, if you're a Christ follower, is all about. That's the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb. We believe that Jesus did something that no one else actually did, that he died, but then he rose again and had victory over sin and death and the grave. And so it was like he was gone and they were mourning him, and then he came back, and that's totally crazy. And we kind of see the same response, that these disciples aren't really sure what to make of this because even though he said it a whole bunch of times, they didn't actually believe it was true. But then there's this thing that happens, and when we read forward in the story, we discover that the same group of people who was freaked out about being in a boat during a thunderstorm suddenly has this incredible boldness. And they proclaim the message, the good news, what we know as the gospel of Jesus without fear, at risk of their lives. And most of them end up being imprisoned. Some of them end up being tortured. And some of them end up being killed. And one of the things we learn from historians, secular historians, people who were not Christians about these early Christ followers, is that they had absolutely no fear of death. They were not afraid because they were following the one who had conquered death. He conquered literal death. He conquered the small death and the big death, and they literally had nothing more to be afraid of because all of the endings in their lives were no longer the end. And so they're looking back, but they're not looking back at failure. They're not looking back at all the times that they missed it. They're looking back at the fact that Jesus did something that no one else did. He conquered sin and death. He was crucified, and a lot of people were crucified, but he rose again, and that was something no one else had ever done. And so they're looking back and they're projecting forward, but not with fear, rather with faith. I think one of the reasons Christians, in particular, fervent Christians who believe, who are struggling to believe, struggle so much with fear, is because fear and faith actually have the same process. Think about it for a second. When you have faith in something or someone, you're looking back at the past, but you're looking forward at the future. When you're afraid of something or someone, you're looking back at the past, but you're projecting that into the future, and it's exactly the same process. And when you face situations in your life, when you face struggles, when you face those endings, the big ones and the little ones, the struggles, the literal ones, the sicknesses and the illnesses, the financial challenges, the things that you feel like they're this big and you're just not enough to deal with it, you have an option in those moments, and that option is fear or faith. It's facing the same situations, but with a different perspective. Instead of saying, this thing is bigger than me, and I can't handle it, you're beginning to trust in the one who's bigger than all of it, who's been there, and that's Jesus. You know what? I wish this meant that our circumstances were easier. I wish it meant that things were better. But it's a different way of looking at your life. Instead of saying, I'm not enough for this, saying, Christ, Jesus is enough. And so in all of these moments in our lives, we have a choice, because faith is the same shape and it fills the same space as fear. Faith is like it's the same size block. It fits in the same size hole. It has the same shape. It has the same number of sides. And there's one of two things that can fit in there. Faith is looking back at the past and saying, I believe, even when it's hard for me to see, even when it's hard for me to understand, and I'm going to choose to trust, as hard as that is going into the future. Faith is the same shape and fills the same hole as fear. And when we choose, even in our difficulty, to walk in faith, fear can't get into that same space. Close your eyes with me for a second. Don't worry, nothing weird's going to happen. Just for a moment, as we close this message, what's the thing that you're most afraid of right now? What's the situation, the circumstance, the person, the reality? Be honest. Name it. What ending? Do you look at your life and it just represents the unknown, and it represents something you can't control and you don't understand, and it just seems so much bigger than you are? Maybe it's a diagnosis, a relapse. It's a financial situation. You're afraid that you're going to end up alone, that they're going to leave, that they'll find out, that you'll be seen, that you'll be known for for who you truly and really are? There's any number of things that can be, and I hope there's a picture in front of you, in your mind, that represents that ending. I want to speak the words of Jesus to you today. As our heads are bowed and our eyes are closed, and that picture, that thing, that name, that circumstance, that place, that memory, that part of the future that we're not sure about, lingers in our minds. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I've been to and through the ultimate end. I've conquered death, and there's no ending in your life. There's no death, literal, figurative, big or small, that is too much for me. And now, in the quietness of this moment, I invite you to trust. All trust is walking forward, even sometimes when we don't feel the way, when we can't see 2 steps ahead, but it's continuing to move in the direction that is true. That's what faith is. When your faith in someone exceeds your fear of something, fear loses its grip. Jesus, we come to you today. We look around our lives. We see so many things. We see so many circumstances. We see things that we should absolutely be afraid of. We also see some things that we've allowed into places in our lives where maybe we shouldn't have fear. But it's become the case for us. I pray for those very real things, their names and their faces and their places and their memories and their dates on the calendar and their words and their bottom lines and their numbers. There are all sorts of things that represent fear. I pray that in this moment, we would allow you to enter that space with us, to walk with us, and do only the thing that you can do, which is to chase our fears away. We thank you for this time. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let's all stand together.
Father of kindness, you have poured out grace. You brought me out of darkness, you have filled me with peace. Giver of mercy, you're my help in time of need. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful In your promises, my confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. And I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. 'Cause you are faithful. You are faithful. Forever you will be faithful. You are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Faithful you are. Faithful. Forever you will be faithful. You are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen.
You know, as I think about the words of that song, you know, I think about Jesus saying those words to his disciples, fear not. You know, for what some of you are facing in your lives, that seems awfully small, doesn't it? You look at that and say, it doesn't help what I face going out the door today. But I don't want you to go out the door with a phrase. I don't want you to go out the door with a couple words. I pray, and my prayer for you this day, this moment, in that situation, with that person, with that thing from the past, or that thing in the future, or that situation that's looming over the next months or the next year, or that financial reality, or that medical condition, or that addiction, or that broken relationship, or that marriage that just feels hopeless, that you know that you're not alone, that Jesus walks with you, that he's been there. He's faced death, and he walks with you. And as you hold on to hope, and as you hold on to faith, my prayer is that you fear not. Just a reminder, if you're our guest today, we have a gift for you. We'd love to get your hands back there at our Welcome Center. And we do have a lunch right after this. It's over at the Commons. So if you have kids, make sure you get your kids. Make sure you get the same kids and the same number of kids. I always say that. It's like the only joke I've got. But we'd love for you to share a meal with us. And my prayer is that as you go today, that you know the presence, the power, and the reality of Jesus who goes with you. Have a great day. See you soon.